So there was this big new tariff policy, right? And the whole idea was to kickstart a huge manufacturing boom and create a ton of jobs. But what happens when the first signs start pointing in the complete opposite direction? Today, we're going to dig into the surprising early numbers from this policy and what it all meant for the economy.
And look, this wasn't some small adjustment. The goal here was massive. We're talking about trying to totally reshape the American industrial scene and bring about a real honest-to-goodness manufacturing renaissance. The dream was to bring jobs back, and bring them back in a big way.
So what was the promise exactly? Let's break down the logic behind the whole thing.
Okay, so the thinking was pretty straightforward. If you make foreign products more expensive, people will start buying American stuff instead. That means more business for U.S. companies, they'll have to make more things, and boom, more jobs for American workers. Sounds like a win-win, doesn't it?
But then, the first jobs report dropped after the tariffs actually went into effect, and whoa, the numbers were, well, they were startling. They were painting a very different picture from the one that had been promised.
Yeah, dismal was the word being thrown around. Instead of seeing job growth in those key sectors the tariffs were supposed to protect, the numbers were actually heading south.
Okay, let's take the construction industry, for example. It relies on materials like steel, which, you guessed it, just got more expensive because of the tariffs. In just 1 month, that sector didn't gain jobs, it actually lost 7,000 of them.
But honestly, this is the one that really gets you. Manufacturing, the very industry this whole policy was designed to save, lost 12,000 jobs. That's not just a slowdown in growth, that's a serious step backward.
And you can see here, this wasn't just a blip in 1 or 2 places. The data showed this really worrying trend across a whole bunch of industries that were directly in the line of fire of these new tariffs, from mining and logging all the way to wholesale trade.
And this wasn't just a one-off bad month either. Researchers spotted a really clear pattern. Pretty much as soon as the trade war got going, these industries that were exposed to tariffs started letting people go. And that trend just kept on going.
So this all begs a massive question, right? Why? If these tariffs were supposed to be creating jobs, why on earth did the opposite seem to be happening? Well, there were a couple of competing ideas. If you look at the timeline, it's pretty telling. Back in April, when the tariffs were announced, manufacturing jobs were holding steady. But then, between May and July, growth just stopped. It flatlined. And by August, the sector was actively losing jobs. It's hard to ignore that timing. And this, as you can imagine, created 2 totally different stories. You had the White House saying, hey, hold on, this is just some short-term pain for long-term gain. Be patient. But a lot of economists were looking at the same numbers and saying, no, this policy is actively backfiring. It's hurting the exact people it was supposed to help.
So, according to the economists, why was it backfiring? Well, they pointed to 2 big things. First, just pure uncertainty. Businesses hate not knowing what's coming next, and with all this talk of new tariffs, a lot of them just hit pause on hiring. And second, and this is a big one, rising costs. The tariffs made raw materials like steel more expensive, which meant it actually cost American companies more to make their stuff here at home. And hey, this wasn't just some theory from an ivory tower. When you actually asked the manufacturers, the people on the ground, the story was crystal clear. A survey out of Texas found that a whopping 72% of them said the tariffs were hurting their business. Only 4% said they were helping.
You know, all this uncertainty, it wasn't just hitting the C-suite. It was starting to trickle down to everyday people. So how are consumers feeling about the economy and their own job security?
So check this out. The New York Fed asked people a really interesting question. If you lost your job today, what do you think the chances are that you'd find a new one? And the answer was pretty sobering. On average, people felt they had less than a 50-50 shot, just a 45% chance.
And just to give you some context here, that 45% number was the lowest that consumer confidence had been in years. We're talking since 2013. This wasn't just a number in a report. It was a real sign of growing anxiety out there. Okay, so where does all this leave us? Well, basically with a huge contradiction between the stated goals of the policy and the early results coming in. Well, what you have is this huge gap, right? A disconnect between the promise of a jobs boom and the reality of a job market that seemed to be slumping, hurting the very industries it was supposed to be propping up. And that leaves us with the big hanging question at the end of all this. If this really is just short-term pain for long-term gain, how long do people, consumers, workers, voters, have to wait for that gain to show up? That's the billion-dollar question.